Aristotle on character, choice, and the weight of everyday life. Aristotle did not write for moments of clarity. He wrote for moments of confusion. He was less interested in who we are at our best and far more concerned with who we become in ordinary, unremarkable situations. What he observed was simple and uncomfortable. Most of life is not decided by dramatic choices, but by repeated, almost invisible ones. By how we respond when nothing forces us to think, by how we behave when no one is watching closely, by how we interpret events that feel unfair, unclear, or quietly disappointing. Aristotle believed that character is not something we possess, it is something we practice, not once, not occasionally, but constantly. This is where his thinking becomes difficult to avoid, because it suggests that our problems are rarely isolated incidents. They are patterns. Consider how often discomfort enters life not as pain, but as irritation. A conversation that feels slightly disrespectful, an effort that goes unnoticed, a situation where you did the right thing and still felt unsatisfied. Aristotle would not ask, who is at fault? He would ask, what disposition is being strengthened here? Every response, he believed, leans us toward a certain kind of person. Impatience practiced often enough becomes temperament. Avoidance repeated quietly becomes identity. Resentment entertained daily becomes worldview. This is why Aristotle placed so much importance on how we meet unpleasant situations, not how we escape them, not how we justify them, but how we interpret them. To him, interpretation was not passive, it was an ethical act. When something goes wrong, we usually rush to label it unfair, pointless, personal. But Aristotle warned that labeling too quickly trains the mind to react rather than to understand. He believed that maturity was not emotional suppression, but emotional proportion. Not the absence of feeling, but the right amount of it. Anger, for example, was not a flaw in itself, but anger without measure was. Too little anger, and a person becomes indifferent to injustice. Too much, and they become ruled by it. The problem, Aristotle observed, is that most people never ask what amount fits the situation. They act as if emotion either justifies itself or must be eliminated entirely. Neither leads to clarity. This becomes visible in everyday life. Someone interrupts you repeatedly. You feel irritation rise. If you suppress it entirely, you leave the interaction diminished. If you explode, you hand control of yourself to the moment. Aristotle would say, the question is not whether you felt anger, but whether you expressed it in proportion to its cause. And proportion requires judgment. Judgment, he believed, is the rarest human skill, because it cannot be automated. It cannot be outsourced. It cannot be learned from rules alone. It develops only through attentive living, through noticing patterns in oneself, through asking again and again, was this response necessary? Was it excessive? Was it avoidant? This is why Aristotle did not separate ethics from daily routine. To him, there was no moral life apart from ordinary decisions. How you speak when tired, how you listen when bored, how you act when recognition is absent, these moments shape character far more than dramatic moral tests. Another uncomfortable idea in Aristotle's thought is his view on pleasure. He did not condemn pleasure, but he distrusted unexamined pleasure, not because pleasure is bad, but because it teaches the mind what to pursue. If comfort is always chosen over effort, the capacity for effort weakens. If distraction becomes the default response to discomfort, the ability to stay present erodes. Over time, this creates a person who is constantly busy but rarely fulfilled. Aristotle noticed that people often mistake activity for purpose. They fill time but neglect direction. They react constantly but choose rarely. For him, the goal of life was not happiness as excitement, but fulfillment as coherence, a sense that one's actions, values, and inner life are aligned rather than fragmented. This alignment, he argued, does not arrive suddenly. It is constructed through habits, but not the superficial kind, not routines designed for productivity or image. He meant mental habits, how quickly we judge, how readily we excuse ourselves, how often we assume intentions in others. These habits operate beneath awareness, yet they determine the tone of our inner life. Aristotle believed that much suffering comes not from events, but from the stories we habitually tell about them. Stories of personal failure, stories of disrespect, stories of being overlooked or misunderstood. The event may be small. The narrative makes it heavy. This is why he valued reflection so highly. Not obsessive self-analysis, but calm examination. To pause after a reaction and ask whether it served understanding or merely discharged emotion. This pause, this small space between impulse and action, was, to Aristotle, the birthplace of freedom. Not freedom from circumstance, but freedom within it. Freedom to choose a response that does not contradict one's deeper aims. In this sense, Aristotle's philosophy is not comforting. It offers no quick relief, but it offers something rarer, a way to live without being constantly at odds with oneself. He understood that life will include frustration, loss, and ambiguity. The question was never how to avoid these, but how not to be shaped poorly by them, how to remain internally ordered even when circumstances are not. This, for Aristotle, was the quiet dignity of a well-lived life. Not dramatic, not loud, but consistent, measured, and over time, deeply stabilizing.